When we cover disappearances on this podcast, almost all of them begin to unravel because the people who disappear have families, friends, loved ones who move mountains to find them. It's hard for a disappearance to forever remain a disappearance because the people in your life notice your absence and do something about it. But what happens when you don't have enough of those people in your life? What happens when no one comes looking and all pieces fall just perfectly enough to make it seem like you're alive when you're not? That was the tragedy of one 24-year-old woman and her 3-year-old daughter. And this is their story. This is the story of Pakeeza Yusuf and Jojo Kaleem. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryaan.
Aryaan, so this is an exciting week to be you, am I right?
Yeah, exciting, nerve-wracking, all of the above. But yeah, Desi Studios is producing a new show. It's called Chaloge Bhaiya that I'm hosting. And we hail autos from all over Bombay and ask the auto driver to take us to his favorite food place. And in this process, we've been to weird pan shops. We've done a bar crawl across Bombay.
Love that.
So much more. I think the show has come out well. It's in Hindi for those of you who do understand and speak it. And I'm excited to, for you to see a non-crime side of me.
Absolutely.
For the first time.
No, that was what it was when Aryaan introduced me to the concept of the show. This was a while before the show actually started being made. I absolutely fell in love with the idea, but I was like, okay, how funny can Aryaan really be when he's conversing with, these worldly auto drivers, cab drivers who've seen it all. But I saw the final cut of the episode. I think it's looking incredible. So excited for all of you to watch it.
Aishwarya's delusional belief in my ideas that helped me produce it. But yeah, it comes out every Thursday. I think this episode will be airing after the first episode comes, but you can find it on our YouTube channel. And every Thursday for 6 weeks, you'll find an awesome episode. And if you want to show your support, please go follow the Instagram channel page at Chaloge Bhaiya. And if you speak Hindi, you know the spelling. And if you don't know the spelling, the show is not made for you.
Yeah. But that's also expecting to see all of you there in the comment section waiting for the premiere to roll out.
Just cracked.
I heard something.
With that,
let's move on to our story.
Do you have for us today? You've been telling me about this for a while. Pakeeza. It's a name you've thrown at me
for a while now.
It's not even one of those cases that I've seen in the DMs. Like I've never heard of it.
Okay, yeah, I found it in our DMs actually. Okay. And it's a case I had never heard of. It's such a prominent case in the New Zealand community of Indian South Asians that live there. But something none of us, I think a lot of us wouldn't have heard of. And so I'm really excited to share this tale with you. For this story, I'm taking you back to the year 2009 to the city of Auckland in New Zealand when a man named Feroz Muhammad was beginning to plan his daughter Fashmina's 21st birthday party. Now, Feroz's daughter didn't have many demands for her birthday. She wanted an intimate party, new clothes to wear to it, all her closest friends in attendance, and her 24-year-old cousin Pakiza there to celebrate this milestone with her. Pakiza and Fashmina were close after all. Born in Fiji during a wave of South Asian immigration to the island, Pakiza had moved to Auckland after her parents divorced, and she began to feel she had no family, even though she seemingly now had two. That is when her father's brother, who's Feroz, and his wife Samina effectively took Pakiza in. And that is when Pakiza developed a deep relationship with Feroz's daughter, her cousin Fashmina. They treated Pakiza like their own, like another daughter in the house. When in 2001, Pakiza's relatives from back in Fiji arranged for her marriage to a man named Faisal Kaleem, who also lived in Auckland, her aunt and uncle hosted her wedding in their own house too, making sure she never felt like she didn't have a home to come to. With Faisal, a young Pakiza went on to have a beautiful daughter in 2003, a daughter the couple named Jojo. But Feroz and his wife watched as Faisal and Pakiza struggled with their new marriage, especially in regards with their finances, with Pakiza even asking her aunt and uncle for milk money for the new baby.
And so Fiji, South Asians, Fiji Indians are a very interesting migrant community.
Yeah, very interesting.
And the history is very interesting. We've actually covered one of the cases before, the Max Sika case, which was the same. Do you know anything about the social demographics demographics of this family? Is it a conservative migrant household, or how would you describe it? I'm trying to understand, because whenever you say girl in a household like this, I think honor killings, but
right. Yeah, no, I think for the demography and also considering the time period, the early 2000s, the late 1990s, I would say they are a relatively progressive family. So when this relationship between Pakiza and her husband, for example, doesn't work out, as you'll all see, it's not that they're very happy that their daughter has gone ahead and gotten a divorce, but are they supportive of the fact that she's chosen to take this step back? 100%.
So like a regular Desi
regular,
family.
Progressive, conservative.
21st century Desi family.
Literally. Like I just said, eventually Feroz and Samina supported Pakiza as she defied community custom to file for divorce from her husband in 2006 and found herself a new home to live in with the help of her ex-husband's work friend, a man named Kaml Reddy, who Pakiza would slowly go on to fall for. And Kaml fell for her too. They were both part of a rather tight-knit community of South Asian Fijians living in Auckland, and both had failed previous marriages and young kids from those marriages that needed to be raised. They had enough in common for a budding romance. After helping her find an apartment for herself, he helped her find a job, and because he was 10 years older to her in age, he was able to shower her with a lifestyle and a kind of love that she just hadn't seen before. He even ended up moving his son from his previous marriage from Fiji to live with Pakeeza and Jojo, creating a new, happy family for her. But then, out of the blue, after a year of a seemingly happy relationship with Kaml, in the year 2006, Pakeeza cut off all ties with her family, including her uncle Feroz, his wife Samina, and her cousin Fashmina. In 2007, when the new school year began, little Jojo failed to show up to kindergarten. Sure, this was weird to Jojo's school staff. Hell, the staff even tried reaching out to Pakeeza but gave up when they got no response after repeated attempts. And in the mind of the family, this was odd, but Pakeeza had talked about leaving everything behind multiple times in the past. Fashmina recounts, quote, she was really ambitious and dreamt big things for Jojo. She always used to say, I'm going to settle down with a man and leave everything and forget everyone and give Jojo a really good life. So it actually made sense at the time. Then we just suddenly lost all contact with her, and that was it. That was the end of everything. End quote. Pakeeza's mother Rosina also wondered where Pakeeza had gone, but the women had shared a strained relationship for years now, with multiple periods of low or no contact. Rosina never liked the fact that Pakeeza had been living with this much older man without marrying him, and she also never liked how he treated her daughter. Through their 1-year relationship together, Pakeeza had told her mother of multiple instances where Kaml had escalated a fight to a point where he had gotten violent and even hit her. But no matter how many times Rosina told Pakeeza to leave Kaml, she wasn't able to. And eventually, Rosina gave up.
It's surprising that the first time a marriage wasn't working out, she was able to. So to me, it would be like, okay, this is a serial failures of marriage, but she has the ability to go through with one.
Correct.
To be able to leave one,
and this wasn't even a marriage.
It was a relationship.
Correct.
So it's a little surprising.
You will see, though, that's not entirely true. And the attempts she made and the things she did to try and leave, we'll find that out later. Cool. But yeah, no, you're right. Sick of her daughter not really knowing what to do in this relationship situation, Rosina cut contact with her and moved back to Fiji and let her daughter sort her own life out without her interference. This was all 2006. But slowly, 2006 turned into 7 and 7 into 8, and then came 2009 when Feroz's daughter Fashmina turned 21. Fashmina wanted Pakeeza for her birthday, but Pakeeza and Jojo had been out of everyone's lives for 3 years now. But she pleaded with her father to figure out where Pakeeza was and to extend her an invite. She wouldn't say no to the invite, Fashmina was sure. And to grant his daughter's wish, Feroz met with Pakeeza's mother Rosina to ask of her latest whereabouts. During that meeting, Rosina revealed to Feroz a sad development. Pakeeza had taken baby Jojo and moved out of Auckland to a city called Christchurch with a white man, a taxi driver, after leaving Kaml high and dry. Now, living with this new man and starting a new life, Pakeeza had said she wanted nothing to do with any of her family members anymore.
Let me just double click on that. Did Pakeeza say this, or was the mother informed of this?
The mother was informed of this.
Oh my God.
So for the last years, no one's actually directly heard or seen from Pakeeza. Yeah. This is all coming to Rosina through
This is dancing under the grave.
100%.
This is dancing under the grave.
100%. So after Rosina moved back to Fiji and cut ties with Pakiza, she had never actually heard from Pakiza again. This development about Pakiza leaving Kaml and falling for a white man and wanting nothing to do with her family or friends came to Rosina from Kaml, who was in touch with Pakiza, at least according to him. When Feroz heard all of this, he was heartbroken. He had loved this child and her baby daughter like his own, and now she had turned her back on them without so much as a goodbye. But he decided to let it go. In interviews later, he explained his rationale. Quote, I thought, well, she's a grown-up girl. She can make her own decisions. End quote. And that's exactly what Rosina thought too. This is the problem of strained familial relationships. And we've seen this, like Aryaan said, in the Shakire Khalili case too. Because contact between Shakire and her daughters was so sparse for so many years, nobody really tried looking for her for years when she vanished into thin air. And the exact same thing was happening to Pakeeza and Jojo, but for a lot longer. Believe it or not, 2009 turned into 10, 10 to 11, and 11 to 12.
Wow.
It had now been 6 years since anyone had seen or heard directly from Pakeeza or Jojo. Jojo would have turned 9 in 2012, but the family had no idea what she looked like now, or how tall she was, or how her voice had changed over the years. But in 2012, Fashmina again pleaded with her father to find Pakeeza. This wasn't for her 21st birthday. This was a much bigger deal. Fashmina was getting engaged. And sure, Pakeeza didn't show up for the birthday party, but she would absolutely show up for the engagement. Fashmina was sure. Feroz yet again wanted his daughter to have the most perfect day, and 3 years had passed since that last conversation with Rosina. Maybe Pakeeza was now ready to rekindle a relationship, Feroz thought, and so he met with Rosina again to ask if he could somehow be connected to Pakeeza. But this time too, like last time, Rosina had a similar story to tell. Kaml had told Rosina that Pakeeza had moved to a different city called North Shore and had, on purpose, withheld her new address from her family because she wanted none of them to come visit her. Feroz was left hurt yet again and passed along the news to his daughter. But when Fashmina's 2013 wedding date neared, Feroz decided to make one last appeal. This time he met with Rosina not to ask for Pakeeza's number or ask to meet her. All he wanted was her address to send her the wedding invitation, and leave it at that, he promised. Quote, then in 2013, during the wedding, we asked Rosina again for the wedding invitation, and that's when she told us she was in Australia. The ever-changing explanation of Pakeeza's whereabouts, which Rosina said had come from Kaml Reddy, did not sit well with the whole family. End quote. And with that, Pakeeza and Jojo never made it to the wedding of someone she cherished so much. But as Feroz spread the word about how odd it was that Pakeeza was so hard to get in touch with, other family members began taking note and started talking too. One by one, in conversations with Rosina, they all began asking where Pakeeza was. One of Pakeeza's aunts, Fatah Bibi, began digging for the truth shortly after. Fatah Bibi was a mother herself and couldn't wrap her head around Rosina's behavior and callous attitude towards her seemingly missing daughter. The more she dug though, the fewer answers she came up with. She got the same responses from Rosina that Feroz had been getting for years now. And so annoyed and worried, Fatah Bibi resolved to get in touch with Pakeeza's father in Australia if her mother wasn't going to help. And finally, a whole 7 years after Pakeeza and Jojo had been last seen or heard from, in the year 2014, Pakeeza's father, Mohammad Yusuf, and her mother, Rosina, dialed the police in New Zealand and reported their daughter and granddaughter missing. And 2014 would finally end up being the year the brutal and heartbreaking truth would reveal itself to the world. In the year 2014, on a random, seemingly normal afternoon, the doorbell rang at Kaml Reddy's home. A seemingly normal-looking woman was standing at his front door, wondering if she could ask him some questions to be able to conduct market research into internet service providers. Reddy was hesitant, as any of us might be, but he obliged. He offered her water, answered her questions, and hoped to be done with the charade so he could get on with his day. But then, a few days later, the same woman called him again, telling him that he had won a once-in-a-lifetime off-roading experience. It was his to claim. But again, like any of us would be, Kaml was suspicious. Scams like these were a dime a dozen even back then. And so politely, Kaml said thank you and passed up on the offer. The woman on the call didn't budge though. What about a fishing trip instead? The prize had multiple kinds of trips that the winner could choose from, and the choice was Kaml's. But this didn't help the scammer's case, and yet again, Kaml declined. Little did he know he would be getting another call from the same woman using a different number just days later, this time asking if he could help repair her car. And this time, Kaml, who was a mechanic by profession, would finally say yes. This wasn't a scam after all, it was a job for Kaml. But the truth was that this wasn't a job for Kaml. It was a job for the officers at the Auckland Police Department, one of whom was the woman who had shown up at Kaml's house and had called him all of those times. What the police department were trying to do here is an investigative technique called Mr. Big, which was developed by the RCMP, or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In this technique, officers go undercover as members of a criminal organization and somehow get the suspect to join the organization. With the suspect in the gang, they engage in some criminal acts with them, like the trade of weapons or drugs or monetary scams, thereby gaining the suspect's trust. The entire time they work with the suspect, they refer to a higher-up boss, or Mr. Big, of the organization, who the suspect slowly comes to revere. As trust builds, the Mr. Big gets the suspect talking about their previous criminal history and extracts a confession. Sometimes they'll tell the suspect that revealing their past criminal history is a prerequisite for joining the gang, something like an initiation process. And every conversation during this operation that involves the suspect is getting meticulously recorded and analyzed by the police department. According to the Moment in Crime podcast, which covered this case thoroughly, while this technique is more common in countries like Canada and Australia, using it in New Zealand requires authorization at, quote, the most senior levels within the police force and must only be used as a last resort when other investigative options have been exhausted, end quote. And in the case of Pakeeza and Jojo's disappearance, the police believed this was their only option. After all, this wasn't a regular investigation. It was effectively a cold case where almost 8 years had passed and all evidence, DNA or otherwise, was most likely lost. Ever since Pakeeza and Jojo had been reported missing to the police, all the police had was a very strong suspicion that Kaml Reddy, Pakeeza's last known romantic partner, was behind the disappearance of the two. In their interrogation of him, his answers were unconvincing and failed to explain how exactly he had all of this information on Pakeeza's whereabouts that he was passing on to her mother for so many years. The police had also learned that it was Kaml who had been withdrawing money from Pakeeza's bank accounts and even accessing her benefit money, which is basically money given by the government to people in various situations of need, such as loss of employment, an emergency, single parenthood, etc. On the other hand, money that Mohammed Yusuf, Pakeeza's ex-husband, had been sending for Jojo's upbringing had not been used for years. Kaml was also the only person who claimed to know where Pakeeza and Jojo were, which was odd since it didn't make sense that Pakeeza maintained contact only with him, her abusive ex-partner, but refused to contact absolutely anyone else. And this strong suspicion was the reason that the police got their authorization for the Mr. Big investigation, which began the moment Kaml said yes to the mechanic job he was offered. Slowly, the investigators sucked Kaml into a fake criminal organization where Kaml was initially in charge of collecting debt, but later handling higher stakes jobs like selling drugs, procuring stolen goods, and even getting rid of evidence given to the gang by fake corrupt cops to help get criminals off, all while investigators built rapport with him, pretending to be his fellow criminals. Some of the scenarios these inspectors created to gain Kaml's trust are so intricate and so well thought out, I can't fathom how they wouldn't work on a criminal. For example, in one situation detailed in the Moment in Crime podcast, Kaml and his fellow fake criminals were pulled over by a cop right after they had procured some illegal documents. The person they got the documents from was a cop who was in on it. The person pulling them over was a cop who was in on it. The officer who pulled them over searched their car, found the documents, and was about to arrest them when the undercover inspector with Kaml called Mr. Big, their boss. And the moment he did that, the cop who had pulled them over got a call. The moment the cop was done with the call, he let the men go. Quote, "I don't know who you are or what's going on, but I've been ordered to let you go," he told the men. The cops did this for 6 months. For 6 months, every day they carried on this charade, setting up elaborate situations and ruses. But the way to get Kaml to confess wasn't straightforward. They knew that.
Ash, they took the word paid actors too seriously.
Way too seriously. This
wow.
is insane. It's so intricate.
It's like a theatre play.
100%. And these are cops whose actual job is being a cop, who are spending every day 6 months effectively being a criminal,
That's
like
awesome.
gang member.
That's awesome.
Wild to me.
Lovely.
And this ruse fell perfectly in place on the 10th of October 2014, when Kaml and his fake criminal partner were in a car together but stopped at a crossing to let a man pass. This man crossing the street was Detective David Sandy, the same inspector who had questioned Kaml on the disappearances months ago. The moment Kaml saw Detective David, he recognized him, and Detective David, who was in on it, pretended to suddenly recognize Kaml too, and proceeded to pull the men over and began asking questions about Pakeeza and Jojo. This gave Kaml's fake criminal partner the perfect in to start a conversation about the mother and daughter. By this point, Kaml had heard of the fake criminal history of his fake criminal partner too, who had apparently stolen a lot of money in the past and had come clean to Mr. Big, which only earned him more respect within the organization. And with that, just days after this encounter with Detective David, Kaml was in conversation with Mr. Big. In this conversation, the boss brought up how he had heard of this interaction with Detective David on the street and needed Kaml to tell him the truth so that he could protect the organization and Kaml if things came down to it. Kaml didn't reveal the details just yet, and so Mr. Big let him leave for lunch. But at lunch, Kaml's fake criminal partner primed him some more, letting him know that everyone in the organization had heard of his involvement in the case, and nobody was going to buy the story that he had nothing to do with it. He needed to come clean if he wanted a place at the organization and wanted Mr. Big to protect him when push came to shove. And with that, when Kaml met Mr. Big a second time that day, he spent 2 hours telling him exactly how he had killed both Pakeeza and Jojo and buried their bodies under one of the busiest bridges in all of Auckland on State Highway 1. He narrated to Mr. Big how, in the months leading up to the murders, Kaml and Pakeeza's relationship had been worse than ever. He had been drinking more than ever, and things had often gotten violent. Kaml had begun to suspect that Pakeeza was seeing someone else behind his back after she had made it clear to him that after months of abuse, she no longer loved him. That, combined with the fact that she had been living off of the money that he had given her, had driven him to a fit of rage multiple times. The night of the murder, something in Kaml finally snapped when Pakeeza locked him out of her home and refused to open the door for him when he knocked. You see, Kaml had been given probation by an Auckland court for having assaulted Pakeeza in the past, and he had been ordered not to contact her in any way, shape or form. That is why Pakeeza locked him out of her home. Kaml sat outside and waited and knocked and screamed, but Pakeeza didn't open the door. Sitting outside, letting the hate and rage and jealousy consume him, Kaml decided he was going to kill her. And so he began to find ways of entering the house when he realized that the back door to the home was open. In the dead of the night, he slipped in and headed to the bedroom where Pakeeza lay asleep. Next to her bed was an iron cord that would go on to become the murder weapon that he picked up and tied around Pakeeza's throat till her body stopped struggling and till no signs of life remained. But killing Pakeeza wasn't enough. There was one huge problem. Jojo was still alive. She was old enough to be able to tell the police bits and pieces of information that could get Kaml caught sooner or later. And besides, if Jojo was alive, Kaml couldn't create the whole story about Pakeeza moving to a different city with a new man and starting afresh. Jojo needed to be killed. And so he moved towards her next. For the 3-year-old baby, Kaml picked up a pillow and held it on her head till her tiny body stopped struggling. Now Kaml had 2 bodies on his hands that he needed to get rid of, and so he wrapped them up in blankets, dumped them in the back of his car, and headed out in search for the perfect burial location. But his scrambled mind couldn't find a place. The sun was coming up and time was running out, and so in a panic, he called his uncle Bal Naidu and told him what had just happened. Bal Naidu joined his nephew in a hunt for the perfect burial location since he had a career in the construction industry and knew exactly what spots would work. Naidu knew there was a bridge on State Highway 1 near a huge construction site where a new bus exchange was being built. That is the location the men picked. The next day, they drove to the spot again, parked their car on the bridge with their bonnet open so that it looked like the men were stopped because they were having car problems. They then headed under the bridge to the marsh where they dug and dug and dug some more for good measure and laid both bodies next to each other under the bridge. Then they proceeded to pile the bodies with lots of rocks so that they don't come up to the surface when the tide rises. Over the coming few months, 300 construction workers met at that burial ground, unaware what lay beneath their feet, and lay hordes of cement and construction material over the ground, capturing the 2 innocent lives deep within the ground for years to come. Slowly, in the months after the murder, riddled with the ghost of his crimes, Kaml stripped Pakiza's home of any memory of her. He sold her furniture and her appliances and even rented a space to hold the rest of her stuff that he couldn't get rid of. He even sold the car in which he moved the bodies. But he made sure to keep all of her money and cards on him. Those he didn't discard, and he continued to use them for years, stripping them of any money that was rightfully Pakeeza and Jojo's. As Mr. Big heard this story in Kaml's own words, he knew he and his team had cracked it. Claiming he felt relieved after getting this huge burden off his chest, Kaml even took his fake criminal friends to the site where he said he had buried the two, and the undercover cops managed to take a picture of him standing right above the spot, where just days later, the police would uncover the two lifeless and long decomposed skeletal remains after a lengthy and complex excavation process.
We believe that the two were actually killed. They weren't reported missing to police until early last year. Due to that, it has been a difficult investigation.
With each and every one of these conversations with Kaml recorded, the police now had a full-fledged confession, on the basis of which Kaml Reddy was arrested just days later. Even when arrested though, Kaml had not the slightest idea how he had got caught. Maybe the worst he thought was that one of his gang members snitched on him and went to the police. But it all dawned on him when he sat inside the police station's interrogation room, where he was shown a recording of his fellow gang member coming clean about his real job as an undercover police officer. Quote, "I'm actually an undercover police officer, and I've been working with you for a number of months now in relation to the disappearance of Pakeeza and Jojo," he said in a 21-second recording. Now, the moment Kaml realized the jig was up, he changed his story. He quickly began to claim his confession was false and that he was coerced into it. He went so far as to say that he was never romantically involved with Pakeeza, a claim that is so easily disproved by the testimony of countless people who will come forward at trial. Instead, he said, he knew their manner and location of death because he knew the man who killed them, a man named James, who was Pakeeza's actual boyfriend at the time of the murders. But here's the thing, James doesn't exist. Not one person in Pakeeza's life had heard of this man, and there was absolutely no proof in her belongings, phone, laptop, of any James in her life. Regardless though, even as trial began, Kaml and his lawyers stuck to the James theory, making a colossal fool out of themselves in the eyes of the jury, the same jury that would go on to hear the many conversations the police had recorded over their Mr. Big investigation. Even the judge called Kaml out on the stupidity of his new story, saying, quote, "You made that confession at the end of a long process, and I am satisfied to the criminal standard that what you said when you finally confessed to the murders was true. What you said then, not realizing you were being recorded, was what actually happened. I do not accept, Mr. Reddy, the evidence you gave in the witness box where you said the confession was wrong. Indeed, what you said in evidence was remarkable for its obvious invention, its inconsistencies at times, and its complete absurdity." End quote. During the trial, details of Kaml's abuse came to the forefront. The tale of how, just months before her murder, Pakeeza had called her ex-husband, pleading for help, was told to the jury. Quote, "He's been threatening me and I'm scared for my life," were her panicked words to him. When her ex-husband Faisal showed up at Pakeeza's home to protect her, he saw a terrifying sight that he narrated to the jury. Quote, "When I got there, he was drunk and had a machete. It was quite long. He swung at me, but he missed. He missed me by about an inch. If I wasn't fast enough, he would have taken my head off." Around Christmas in 2006, Pakeeza began making more frequent calls to her mother in Fiji, saying that Reddy was beating her. Pakeeza's mother said the last time she had spoken to her daughter, she was clearly unhappy. In fact, for this incident, Kaml went to court in January of 2007, which was already after he had killed Pakeeza and Jojo, but nobody knew. With all of this information and all of these recordings coming to the forefront, Kaml's fate was sealed. When the jury deliberated and returned with a verdict, the world, and especially Pakeeza's family, rejoiced. Kaml Reddy was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 21 years, after which he was to be evaluated by a board which will determine whether or not he's fit to enter the world, which will be in 2036. At this sentencing, Justice Asher said the following, quote, "They deserved to live happy lives. Instead, they died horrible deaths at your hands. You have no moral appreciation of the awful murders you've carried out or the damage you've done. Your complete refusal throughout the court process to acknowledge your role in the murders must mean there can be no discount for remorse. Indeed, the expression of remorse that you make is really just a furtherance of the lies you've told, because you say you're remorseful for helping the person you've invented, who you say committed the murders. With the probation officer, you continue to assert that you did not murder Pakeeza and Jojo. You maintain that someone else did. You claimed that you didn't even have a relationship with Pakeeza, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. In the words of the probation officer, you display no insight into your offending and have no empathy for the victims. Indeed, although I don't penalize you for this, your protestations of remorse are really just another symptom of your callousness. This was a shocking and callous double murder. The sentence that I impose must denounce and deter such actions." End quote. Kaml, however, went on to appeal this decision by the court multiple times, continuing to maintain his innocence to this date. But his appeals were all rejected. When he faced the threat of deportation to Fiji for after he finished his sentence in New Zealand, he had the audacity to appeal that too, on the grounds that his son lives in New Zealand and he deserves to be in the same country as him, all after he stripped a woman of her right to be a mother to her child. But while Kaml got handcuffed and sent to prison in 2014, some people's lives were altered forever and will probably never go back to normal. Pakeeza's mother Rosina wondered what their last moments would have been like, whether they were able to speak any words in a plea for help, or whether they were in pain, or whether they thought of her, wishing for her to come and help. For Firoz, the day he learned of Pakeeza's death was the day it felt like he had lost his own daughter. Quote, "We went down to the scene where Pakeeza's remains were and Jojo's remains were. It was not a good scene. It was so sad. I just couldn't sleep that night. I mean, how on earth could someone do that to a baby? And Pakeeza was a baby to us. She grew up in front of us as a small kid. I still can see her in the swings in Fiji. And then you just walk under a bridge and see the scene where your dear ones were left behind." End quote. For Pakeeza's father, the one person who had tried to find his daughter and granddaughter by even hiring a private investigator, life has stood still to the moment in time when he learnt that their bodies were found. His Facebook profile gives his loved ones an insight into his grief, where he wonders why someone would, quote, "kill an angel like that." But unfortunately, there is no answer to that question. Pakeeza had no fault. She was in an abusive relationship and had left. She had gone to court. She had spoken up. She had told people around her that she felt like she was in danger. What else could she have done? Jojo had no fault. She was a baby, unable to comprehend the hate in the man she must have once found some comfort in. What else could she have done? And sometimes that is the tragedy of some of the cases we cover. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.